All right, so let's take this idea now, our hard-coded, not best practice approach to our fragment communication, and let's translate this now. How should you do it when you get out into the real world? How does this change? The biggest change is going to be, if we change colors here, is going to be right here. The contracts that are going to exist now between the activities and the fragments. In the past, we just had a hard-coded contract because we had a reference to the actual data type that contained the method we were trying to call. What we want to do, though, is we want to loosely couple these guys together. Okay, we want to break the tight connection that exists right now between the two fragments and the main activity. Now, the way we decouple those, the way we loosely break those apart, okay, is through the use of interfaces. Wow, that's a weird-looking F. Let's try that again. Now, if you remember, interfaces are a contract between two different, pieces of software that a particular method signature will be available. We don't care about data types for the callee. I can do that now onto the interface because really the thing I'm trying to establish is that my methods exist. So when we were back here, for example, I wanted to guarantee that my main activity was able to call an update text method. Or, for example, from my button, I needed to guarantee that my activity had a method called frag button pressed. Okay? Right now, I am hard-coded on this main activity. What we want to do instead is make a method or an interface inside the fragment that says these are the methods I need to be able to call, and whatever thing I'm attached to. Okay, and then we'll use a new lifecycle event on attach now. I want to guarantee that it has those methods that I am going to need. Okay, so that way the fragment will be able to work with whatever activity ever is holding it in the future, or child fragment, or whatever different scenario comes up. We want to decouple those, and interfaces are the way we're going to decouple those. Okay, now the easiest way we're going to do that is we need to declare an interface. Now, there's two different ways we can declare the interface. We can declare the interfaces separate, or we can declare them as inner. So, meaning we declare the interface inside the fragment itself. Now, best practice for something like that is to actually declare it inside the fragment. Now, the reason being is these interfaces are going to be specific to the fragment which contains them. Okay, no other fragment should be sharing the same interface. Now, if there's ever a case where you have multiple fragments all sharing the same interface, then absolutely it makes sense to put that in place and to extract that out into a separate interface class. But because we're going to share, or because the fragment is only going to have one interface, and only this interface will only apply to the one fragment, the best practice is to actually put that interface inside the fragment itself. Now, the way we're going to declare that, okay, is we are going to make a public interface. Okay, it's basically like declaring a variable, except our data type is going to be an interface instead of an integer, a button, or a view, or whatever. And then we're going to call this interface. Let's make it simple. Call it on button pressed. Okay, this public interface, not on button pressed, sorry, on button listener, which will contain a method. Okay, our interface, then our listener, and then we now need to define inside of our interface what methods do I need to guarantee are in place. So we can do our main activity. We had a method we called frag button pressed. This signature right here is the thing really I'm wanting to guarantee is in place. So we can put that inside of our interface and say, I need to guarantee, and public is unnecessary at this point because an interface has to be public because I'm allowing somebody else to call it. So what I'm really guaranteeing is I need to have a method that returns nothing, that is called frag button pressed, and accepts one parameter of type integer that I'm going to call count. Okay, now whatever it's just like declaring any method now. Any methods or number of parameters you need to do, all of those things. You can have multiple methods within an individual interface. Those are all acceptable things as well. So we have our interface here, and on our activity, we simply need to tell it that it implements that interface. Now, we're going to implement our on, what did we call it? Button, fragment button dot on button listener. That's what we called it. Okay. Now notice I had to put fragment button in first. Okay, because on button listener is actually an inner interface belonging to fragment button. So this the fragment button dot tells it you're implementing the interface that belongs to fragment button. Again, another reason why having inner interfaces makes sense, because now whenever you're implementing them, you can see specifically what they are tied to later on. Okay, that's all that really needs to take place in the activity, because I already have the method implemented from before. What we need to do now is change this guy. Okay, we don't want to get a reference to main activity, because again, that breaks the whole flexibility that comes with a interface. Rather, what we need to do now is we're going to get a reference to the thing that's going to be holding our interface, i.e. the thing that holds our fragment, which is our activity in the end, the thing we are attached to, and we're going to save a copy of that, and we're going to guarantee and make sure that the two meet or match up properly. Okay, so we're going to declare another variable. Let's call it private. Our data type is going to be the interface type we just made on button listener, and the common name you'll see when you get in the industry is mCallback, because that's what this is it's a member variable that's going to allow us to call back. Okay, it's where do I reach out when I need to talk outside of myself. So in this case, what thing is implementing the interface of methods I have to be able to call. So where can I call back to? Okay, now our callback is going to be set in a override method we haven't done, part of the life cycle. Specifically now, okay, specifically we want to be focusing in on this method right here, on attach. Okay, we've already taken care of on create view and on start, but on attach is when my fragment is hooked onto something. Okay, when I have a parent that I belong to, that I can then work on creating and having views and other things like that, I have to first be attached to something. So on attach will give us a reference to the thing that is attached to. So we're going to come in here again and we're going to choose generate. And we're going to override. And we're going to choose on attach. Okay. Now, here's one place we've got to take just a minute and talk for a second. Notice there are two on attaches. On attach context and on attach activity. Now, this is probably one of the first times in your life you're ever going to be told, choose the deprecated one. Now, there's a line through it that shows you it's deprecated on attach activity. Now, there's a very critical reason why. Okay, on attach context is part of Android Oreo. It just recently came out last year. However, it is not backwards compatible to previous lifecycle or to previous Android instances. They didn't call that lifecycle event. So we have to choose the activity because I want this to happen as far back as NuGet, which is what we're supporting, NuGet and Lollipop and other Android versions that aren't aware of the context lifecycle argument. So we're going to make sure we choose the deprecated version because that's going to allow us to go backwards. Now, an activity is a type of context, so it inherits from there. However, it only will call the one method that it knows. So in older versions, it'll call activity. And then in the newer versions, actually, I think it might actually call both. But we're going to focus in on activity because we don't need the context. We're not doing any of the crazy fancy stuff that would allow us to need the other one anyway. So we're going to choose the deprecated version on attached to activity. Okay, and it's going to whine that it's deprecated, and we're going to say we really don't care. So we're going to just ignore the deprecation for now. Okay. What we need to do, though, is this is going to tell us what we are attached to, what activity. We need to make sure that activity implements the interface that we just requested. Okay? So we're going to wrap this in a try-catch. Because if it doesn't work, I want to throw an error, and I want to stop things so that whatever developer is creating this thing can fix it. You know, essentially, I want to say, hey, dum-dum, you didn't implement my interface. Stop it, what you're doing, and actually go implement my interface and then come back. Because this fragment is useless without the interface. Okay? So we're going to try to set it. So we're going to set mCallback, and we're going to cast it. Okay, this is the critical thing, is on button listener. If you don't cast it, it will never attempt to force the two in place, and you'll get a different kind of error. So we want to try force casting our activity argument to this type. However, if it doesn't work, we are going to catch a class cast exception. Okay. And we are going to then just throw up a new error to our, in fact, let's just throw class, new class cast, wow, can I not spell? Class cast exception, activity dot to string. The only reason we're recreating a new version of the same thing is so we can append this message to give the developer some useful information. So we're going to say whatever activity they just tried to must implement. In fact, why don't we bring this down a line so it's easier for you to see. Must implement on button listener. Okay. Tell whoever developed this thing that they're missing the interface that we're looking for. Okay. So now we can go ahead and we run this, and we'll see everything works as we expect. I can still say pressing several times. However, what happens if my activity doesn't implement my interface? What I think is going to happen is it going to blow up when I start? Is it going to blow up when I push a button? As you can see, it blows up when it starts. Now, we're going to want to, you're going to run into problems like this, so let's talk about how we solve things like this. Okay, when it crashes or something else like that, there's a button down here called logcat. You can get to it in the toolbar if you need to as well, if it's not here. And logcat is going to show you a series of messages coming from the device. Okay, what we're going to look for is we're going to want to find an error message. So we can choose to provide a filter. For example, I might say, you know what, I want to find errors, and they're going to be in red, and we're going to look at this error, and we're going to scroll to the top of it, and it's going to say unable to start activity with a whole lot of information in a message chain. Now, you can spend a whole lot of time, and you're going to say that was, that we couldn't start it because we couldn't inflate the class fragment. But really, the reason we couldn't inflate the class fragment is because we couldn't cast the attached activity excuse me, to the appropriate type, because it didn't implement the interface. Even though it has the right method, it doesn't guarantee the contract isn't present with the implements keyword. So when you see these error messages like this, there's a ton of information on here, as you can see. The thing you're going to look for is you're going to look for blue. Okay, it sounds silly as it is, but blue means it's into your code somewhere. So for example, if we come into our onCreate, well, set content view, that's not really helpful. So we'll come back down a little bit further, and we can see here on attach, and it's happening on our throw line, which will give us a hint. In fact, we can see in the message, edu.weber.imcaptaincode.fragmentdemo.mainActivity must implement on button listener. The same exact message we just got right here. So we're going to use the logcat will help us solve problems like that. Okay, let's go ahead and fix it. Let's put it back so we don't have that issue anymore. But this log view is really useful. For example, if I want to be able to maybe make output debugging statements, you want to go old school, print line debugging. Okay, maybe you're afraid of the debugger, and we'll show you how to use the debugger as we come up to other things like that. We set breakpoints, but we can also use logs. For example, if I wanted to know, I just got into the onStart method. I can use log dot, and then I can choose. I can choose I for information, D for debug, E for error, W for warning. This is a log.d, okay? Because I want to put this out as a debug message. I don't want to send it off with my production app, just when we're in debug. Okay, Alt-Enter to import the class. It takes two arguments, a tag and a message. Okay, notice I didn't type tag or I didn't type message. Both of those showed up as hints from the IDE to tell me that that's what those arguments are. The tag is just arbitrary text you can use to keep all of the different log messages separate, to help you find them. So I can call this tag, for example, fragment button, because that's where it came from. Or I could call it test, or I could call whatever you want to put there. Nobody sees this but you, so it's you as a developer. And I have started. And that will tell us we've reached our onStart method. So for example, if you wanted to play with a lifecycle, you could go ahead and create an activity, override all the lifecycle events, and put log messages in each of them and see them firing in order. Once you have that log message in place, okay, I can change my view now to debug. And you notice there's a whole lot of stuff happening here in my debug view. So it might be easier to apply a filter, and I could say, I want to find the debug views that contain my tag fragment button, okay? Because the way it breaks down is we get the type of message, a debug message, slash the tag, followed by whatever message we put into place. You can also use regular expressions in here. There's a lot of really powerful things you can do as part of your debugging. The better way, though, when you're especially if you're having a problem, you're having a hard time tracking down, the better way to do it is to set a breakpoint. Just like every other IDE, you click in the side, set the red dot. The key thing, though, now is we're going to, instead of hitting the run with the green arrow, we're going to hit the one that has a bug and the green arrow to tell it to run a debug app. Now, it'll take a minute. When we first launch the activity, you'll see it came up with that little message there, waiting for it to settle, which means it's connecting between the emulator or your physical device and the IDE. And now I'm stopped on this breakpoint, and I have typical Java controls at this point. I can expect and see, okay, main activity, or activity as of type main activity. I can see the things it holds. I can do all those other things that I may need to access. I can try stepping over it. I can see if it works. For example, it stepped through. It casted just fine. Main activity passed, and it worked. I can set up watches. I can see the stack trace, and I can step backwards if I need to. For example, I'm like, okay, well, how did I get here from main activity? Well, it was this line that triggered through, and so forth. You can, standard debugging tools are available at that place. Okay. The last thing I need to show you for this particular assignment, okay. Well, actually, I have two things I need to show you. Sorry, one more thing we need to do first is there is one particular error that is the bane of most Android developers. And someday, if you ever learn Kotlin, one of the big advantages of Kotlin is it allows nullable types, which simplifies getting rid of this error message. Come on, get this thing to scroll down. Specifically, what we call null pointers. You're gonna run into them before this class is over, guaranteed. A null pointer exception. So those debugging tools, looking through the logs to find those null pointers, that is going to be a key thing for you to learn to look for, is that null pointer exception. Basically means you tried to access a variable before it was set. For example, in my main activity, if I weren't going first, making sure if it was null and setting it, let's say, for example, I was silly and I forgot to put that in there, okay, and I ran my application, okay. Null pointers are going to be runtime issues, not compile time issues. Because notice, everything compiles just fine, and my application looks like it's going to work. However, when I press the button, my application crashes. And if we come back to logcat now, notice we can scroll through, we find the big chunk of red, or you can change it to error if you want. We're going to see java.lang.nullPointerException. We attempt to invoke this method on a null object reference. Okay, meaning we tried to call object update text right here. In fact, you can see it. The stack trace we came through was our fragment button. That worked. We got to main activity. And when I tried to call update text, we did that on a null object reference. Meaning, if we set a breakpoint right here, oops, sorry, dang it, wrong button. Let's redo that in debug mode. There we go. Don't need that one anymore, so we can put play. Okay, click the button, and we're going to stop here. And notice it says frag TV is null. Okay, so when you're crashing with those null pointers, a breakpoint is going to be one of your best friends. You can also do a log.d and print out, say, frag TV, and it'll tell you it's null. to find those problems when you're getting a null pointer, figuring out what variable involved in this process doesn't exist. Okay? So being careful, though, of how you write your code is first and foremost, but inevitably when something blows up, make sure you're checking and paying attention for those null pointer errors because you're going to run into them a lot. The last thing I want to show you is how to write a toast, because you'll need these for your assignment. So for example, if I had another, let's do that. Inside of my text view, we're going to have to change this guy from a frame layout now because it's going to hold something more than a text view. Let's change it to a linear layout that's vertical. We can add our text view, and let's drop another button on here. And okay, let's take our button. Let's drag him down below. There we go. Let's give our button. Let's give it a new ID though, because we don't want to use the same ID. Let's call this guy BTN. Say hi, for example, which is fine. And we're going to extract out our string, which is fine. Okay. So we've got our button here. Now inside of our fragment, we're going to get a reference to that guy, just like we've done before. Private button, BTN, say hi. Notice the connection between the variable names I'm using and the IDs I'm giving. That helps make the UI less confusing when you can do that, because you can connect logically now. It connects in your mind a little bit easier. They don't have to be the same by any means. It just helps things be simpler. So in our start now, let's get a reference. Let's populate this guy to a button and say root.find UI r.id dot button btn. Nope. What did we call it? Button say hi. My Gradle's not keeping up with me. Okay. Why is it not built yet? Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. This is saying it's not found, which means I know it's here because I just put it here. Copy and paste it, make sure I didn't do a typo. Yeah, so in those cases, when you get weird things like this, easy ways to go about it is it usually means it's not, hasn't built properly. So you can try doing like a sync. Sometimes this will fix it. If a sync doesn't fix it, which in this case a sync did because the sync redid it, you can also come up and do a clean and then do a rebuild after you do the clean, and that'll almost always fix those issues. If either of those doesn't fix it, 99% of the time the problem's on your end rather than a compiler issue. So now I have a reference to my say hi button. We're going to now say btn say hi dot set on click listener. Create our anonymous inner class for our on click listener, and let's have him make a toast. Okay, now a toast is a message that pops up on the screen. It's an Android convention. You'll see it in just a minute. We also have snack bars, and we can do snack bars in future assignments, which are kind of the follow-on for replacement for toasts. However, they have to be used with a coordinator layout, and we're not using that. So we can have a toast, and toasts are easy. It's a static method inside of the class toast.makeText. Okay. We're going to give it the context, which can be just this, okay? Give it the text message we want it, or what do we want it to say? And this can be a string or a resource to a string. If you pass it an integer, it'll assume you're referencing a string inside of your strings. So for example, if we were to come into values and strings, and we had this text message, maybe we add another string. Let's do it so you can see both ways. String name equals toast message. Oops, hold on, I can't uppercase that. There we go, toast message, and hello from toast. Okay, If I want to pass an ID, I can pass it r.id.hello from toast. What did we call it? Isn't that what I called it? Wow, I am like losing my mind today. Toast message, okay? And then our third argument is a constant of how long does this toast show up. So inside the toast class, I can choose. Let me wrap these down a little bit so you can see, okay? There is a toast, there's two options. I can choose long or short. So if I want to choose short, that's fine. Once I have my toast though, I have to show it. So I can say toast.show. Okay? Let's force a build again. Unsupported type string. Oh, that's why it's my fault. See, again, I'm being a dummy. It's not r.id, it's r.string to find our toast message. Why are you not finding my resource? Okay, so in this case, when it's not showing up in the drop down, we're going to let Gradle run again. This instructor machine I'm using to record is kind of poor on resources. Why are you not finding my resource? In the project. And anytime you see R is not found, that means it hasn't built successfully. Why are you being stupid? I don't know. We're going to for just simplicity's sake, I'm just going to put the string in place. And we'll put string is hello from toast. Okay, I'm going to pause this for just a second and debug. Oops. Okay, I figured out what was wrong. I'm done. Actually, I just made a simple mistake. Because I'm making my toast within the anonymous class of my onClick listener, when I'm using this, the this isn't actually referencing the fragment. Rather, the this is referencing the onClick listener. So rather, we're going to pass get activity. If I were to declare the toast, for example, like in outside of my click listener, and I just showed the toast, then I wouldn't have that issue. The other issue I had too, when I was complaining about a string, is I used a capital S string out of habit in my XML file. Both of those were causing us problems. So now, if we run it, it'll compile, which is great. However, we're going to run into a problem you're going to see here in just a second. Our button's not visible. Now, I want to show you why, because I'm sure you'll run into the same issue as well. Okay, the reason this button doesn't show up, if we come back to our text layout, our height on the text view itself is match parent, meaning we can also see this if we come to the design view, my string takes the entire screen. My button actually exists down here off the screen. So we want to make sure in those cases that our layout is set to wrap height or wrap content, and now our button will show up. If we don't want our button to be the whole thing, we can also make our button wrap the content so we don't have a ginormous friggin' button there. We can do that as well. Now if we run it, we'll see our button shows up. And I can press it, and our toast pops up. Toast is this little thing that pops up and says, hello. Now these toasts will stack up, so if I click it a whole bunch of times, they're going to stack one after another, after another, after another, and you'll see every now and again it'll kind of fade and glitch just a little bit as one behind it fades out, because each of these toasts are stacking up on top of each other. So you kind of have to be a little bit careful for that, but don't worry about that for this assignment too much. Just be aware of it. But we have communication taking place. We have toasts. How to see a little bit with errors now with null pointers and logs, and checking with logcat. Okay? If you have questions through any of this stuff, please make sure to reach out. Again, this week is super critical because we'll start snowballing from here. So if you're lost or you're confused, don't be afraid or don't be ashamed to reach out and ask for help, and I'd be happy to help you from there. Okay, we'll see you online.